Bonding bunnies is not for the weak. My two male bunnies have been bonded for about 5 months now, and I've been wanting to make a video on it, but honestly, it was kind of traumatizing.
Got this corn in my mouth.
So I've been putting it off. It really wasn't that bad. It was just such a long process that once it was over, I didn't want to think about it anymore. However, now that I've had some time to process it, I think I can offer some hopefully valuable insight to bunny bonding. We've had a ton of questions about bonding ever since we started, even until now, so I want to talk about some of the most common ones. And depending on how it goes, we can go more in depth on things if needed. There's not one perfect way to bond bunnies. There's different ways you can do it, so I'm just going to talk about how we did it, what we would have done differently, what worked for us. One thing I will go ahead and throw out there is that I think it's very important that you have your bunnies spayed or neutered prior to bonding. But other than that, let me know what questions you have about bonding in the comments. I'll do my best to address those things based on our experience with bonding. Bunnies are just so cute and cuddly. They love each other. They love everybody. It's all just rainbows and butterflies, right? Wrong. Very wrong. For bunnies to exist peacefully together, they have to establish a hierarchy. So one of the bunnies has to come out being the top bunny, and the other bunny or bunnies has to accept that. A lot of the bonding is a power struggle, which is what I saw with Denzel and Sully. They both have very big personalities and they both wanted to be top bunnies. So in terms of introducing bunnies to each other, you have to start out with a neutral space. And when I say neutral, I mean neutral. Even the slightest scent of one of the bunnies in the bonding area or around the bonding area, you're gonna have problems. A lot of people use X-Pens to introduce and bond bunnies, which I think is a good idea, but we used a little doggy playpen. This was ours. But it's very important to note that we did not start with this entire playpen. You have to start super, super small. I'm talking like a quarter of this whole playpen is the size that we started out with. Brand new playpen, so it didn't smell like either one of them, and then I used puppy pads so Denzel or Sully wouldn't recognize any blankets or anything like that. When I tell you the bonding area has to be neutral and have absolutely no bunny scent in it or around it, I scrub the walls. This is the living room. I scrub the walls, the floors, the baseboards, everything in vinegar to get rid of any of Denzel's smell. This gives you a better idea of how small I started their bonding area out. It's super important to start out small because the bigger you start out, they're just gonna have more space to avoid each other, or they're gonna be territorial and claim sides and all stuff like that. We started out very, very small, and as they did good, I slowly expanded their space. I have heard people say that they started out with large bonding areas and that worked for them. Denzel and Sully did a lot better when we started with a smaller space and worked our way up. Our way of bonding bunnies is not the only way to bond bunnies, so just because it worked for us doesn't mean it's gonna work for you too. You gotta find out what works best for you and your bunnies. Do you ever research something and feel like you have a pretty good understanding on it? You know where to start, you're feeling okay about it. That's how I felt going into bunny bonding, and I was hoping somebody would mention bathtub bonding because we tried it and we have some experience with it. I actually spent a lot of time bonding in the bathtub, and Denzel and Sully did so well. I have countless videos and pictures of them cuddling and being so lovey-dovey in the bathtub. This one's kind of funny. Sully had flopped and he was stretching out, but the bathroom worked really well for Denzel and Sully until it just didn't. I chose to start with the bathtub because it was so neutral. You know, neither one of them ever goes into the bathtub. It would never have any scent. I read stories online of people successfully bonding bunnies in bathtubs, so I thought that was a great place to start considering Denzel's a free-roam bunny and it was hard to otherwise find a neutral area. If you see the blankets moving, it's Sully. A really important aspect of bonding, in my opinion, is that you have to start small and work your way up. The problem with the bathtub is that you just can't get any bigger. Once you expand to the full size of the bathtub, that's it. It's not getting any bigger. And for me to be comfortable and to say that my bunnies are successfully bonded, they needed to be able to coincide in an area bigger than the bathtub. That was my main problem with bathtub bonding, along with it's just not very practical. I was sitting on the bathroom floor or sitting just on the toilet watching them for hours. At one point, we spent a full 24 hours in the bathtub bonding, and I slept on the bathroom floor. After a full 24 hours of completely getting along, no negative behaviors, I thought that they were probably bonded. So I took them out of the bathtub, and right away there was a fight. All in all, I just wouldn't recommend bathtub bonding. I'm sure it works for some people, but it's just not enough space, and it's just not very practical. This is gonna sound weird if you're new here and you're not familiar with bunnies, but if you put two bunnies together without bonding them, they're gonna rip each other's heads off. I didn't even know this when I had my first bunny. It wasn't until I got my second bunny that I realized how much really goes into it. But yes, fighting is normal, but only to a degree. There should never be any hair flying. You have to stop it before it gets to that point. The the term helicopter mom? Well, that's what I turned myself into during bunny bonding. I hovered over these two while they were bunny bonding because it was just too risky. An interesting fact about bunnies is that they hold grudges, and they really hold grudges. If you cross them, they're never gonna forget about it. This is why it can be so hard to bond some bunnies, because once they have a fight and one of them gets injured, it can be almost impossible for them to come back from that. The slightest sign of aggression, whether that's their ears back, tail up, their little stance, growling, I would intervene. But to de-escalate that situation really quick before it turns into something bad. Some people wear mittens when bonding their bunnies because when you do have to intervene, they will bite you, and they'll bite really hard. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to hurt the other bunny. But in my opinion, I would rather be the one that got bit because I understand and I'm gonna forgive them. The other bunny's not. I didn't wear gloves or mittens, but I did have a dustpan in my hand at all times. As soon as I saw a warning sign, I would go psh and separate them. Then I would try to distract them by doing something like what I'm doing in this picture, where I put them together and pet. There's this thing called a bunny death tornado, and if you've never seen one, you don't want to. While Denzel and Sully were bonding, they did end up getting into a couple of death tornadoes, and that's why I turned into a helicopter. Definitely would recommend to break up a fight before it even happens and look for those warning signs. And again, this is just what worked best for me and my bunnies. This is not the only way to bond bunnies, so make sure you find out what works best for you. I bonded my two little monster bunnies, and I'm here to answer all of your questions. Originally, we started bonding in the bathtub, and long story short, that didn't work out, but if you're interested in that, I did make another video in this series about it. What worked for us was starting small and gradually expanding their area as they did better. I started as small as possible with them, almost uncomfortably small, because when they had the bigger space, they would just start fighting and they would claim sides and it would end badly. This is a good example of what our starter space looked like, so they definitely had enough room to turn around, but there wasn't much else. I tried just about everything when it comes to bunny bonding because I so badly wanted it to work, and it just wasn't. Denzel and Sully both have very strong personalities, and now they're best of friends, but they definitely did not start out like that. So yes, we did try bonding them in the car, which is stress bonding, although I try to take them on car rides on a regular basis anyways because I don't want car rides to be stressful. But that is considered stress bonding in that kind of situation, but I don't think it helped whatsoever. Denzel just flopped. Overall, the process took us about 4 months, and it was just a bunch of trial and error. We tried a ton of different things to see what would work best. It was bonding every single day. You have to be so consistent with it, which is why once it was over, I was so relieved that I didn't even want to think about it anymore. I think the majority of bunnies are not going to take 4 months to bond, but for us in our situation, that's just how the cookie crumbled. Ultimately, 24/7 bonding is what finally solidified their bond, but that doesn't come without its own set of limitations, so let me know if you want to hear more about that. I know bonding bunnies sounds super easy, but in my experience, it was very challenging. I bonded my two male bunnies who both had very dominant personalities. In the bunny bonding world, there is only one dominant bunny, so needless to say, we ran into a lot of problems. Our bonding process took about 4 months, and what finally solidified their bond after trying a bunch of different things was 24/7 bonding. So we didn't start 24/7 bonding until the end, and it lasted about 2 weeks, if I remember correctly. The problem with 24/7 bonding, and the reason I didn't do it sooner, was it's just not feasible. I spent every single second with them for 2 weeks straight, and I was in a very special situation to be able to do so. And I don't think that that's realistic for most people, and up until that point, it wasn't realistic for me either, so that's why it took me so long to try it out. The thing with 24/7 bonding is you just don't know how long it's gonna take. You don't know when the bunnies are gonna bond. And if you stop, start, it kind of defeats the purpose of doing 24/7. Up until that point, we were doing daily bonding for just hours on end. I mean, we worked our way up to 8 hours a day, which I was having to do late into the night because that's also kind of not reasonable for most people. I don't say any of this to be discouraging to anybody looking to bond bunnies, but it wasn't an easy process for us. It could be very easy for you. I hope it is. But in full transparency, there's a possibility that it could be a huge time commitment. Here's some of the best things I did when bonding my bunnies that really made a difference. First thing that was so important when bonding them was being consistent. If I wasn't consistent, they may have never been bonded. Doing bonding sessions every single day is crucial. I've talked about 24/7 bonding before, which is great. I mean, you can't get any more consistent than 24/7. But if you're not able to do 24/7 bonding, doing bonding sessions every single day is a must. It can be such a huge time commitment because there's gonna be days when you don't have time and you still have to make time. There's gonna be days when you don't feel like bonding and you still have to bond. Another thing that I did that I think was so helpful helpful was forced cuddling. This is where I would take one of them and put them beside the other one and pet them, sometimes for a very long time. Do this sometimes when I saw one of them starting to act a bit aggressive toward the other, or maybe if they just hadn't interacted very much in a while, I would put them together and do this. I think forced cuddling made such a big difference in them being able to finally bond. A great way to transfer their scent on each other so they get used to it. Another thing that was extremely helpful was eating together. Bunnies really bond when they're eating together. If you have a bunny, you know that they love to eat, especially my bunny Denzel. When they're eating, they're not only doing something that they enjoy, but they're also learning to trust the other bunny. They're learning how to share, and they're also learning how to be comfortable with doing an everyday activity with another bunny. These 3 tips are probably some of the best bunny bonding tips that I have. Without doing these 3 things, my bunnies would probably still be arch enemies to this day. Bunnies are one of the most ferocious animals that you can bring into your house. I wish that was clickbait, but unfortunately it's serious. If you're introducing new bunnies to each other, it can turn into an all-out brawl if you're not careful, so I'm trying to give you my best tips so that doesn't happen. But for starters, when you bring your new bunny home, definitely keep them separated. They need to be separated until they're fully bonded. So in our case, Denzel was the resident bunny and he was completely free roam. So when I brought Sully in, I had an X pen set up so he could be separated from Denzel, but also for potty training purposes. They ended up spending a lot of time together through the fence. Denzel would go up to the gate all the time and lay beside Sully. Sometimes Sully would groom Denzel through the gate. At the time, I thought this was such a good sign because I thought that meant they would get along. But in hindsight, how they acted with a barrier in between them was absolutely no indication of how bonding was gonna go. I would even wake up sometimes and they would be sleeping together through the fence. But as you know, bonding for them was not easy at all, so all of this is irrelevant. When you take the barrier away, that's when you're gonna see how they really interact with each other, and Sully very much became an aggressor without the fence. Don't get me wrong, Denzel was also aggressive at times, but it seemed like Sully was more of the agitator, more of the instigator, and then Denzel would just react. I probably suggest putting some sort of barrier in between the fence just so there can be no physical contact. Even though Denzel and Sully didn't have any problems, I've heard about a lot of bunnies even fighting through the fence. I think bunnies being able to see and smell each other is beneficial prior to being introduced, even while being introduced, because it helps them get more familiar with each other. I would probably limit that physical contact unless they're actually bonding and you're with them. To answer the last question of this comment, no, I didn't feel any guilt about getting a second bunny because I know that bunnies are very social animals, and although Denzel had Leo, I knew he needed another bunny friend. As much as I wish there was a one-size-fits-all for bunny bonding, there's just not. I know that would make everybody's lives so much easier. But bunnies are so different from one another, it's hard to say that what works for one bunny is going to work for the next bunny. With that being said, I have read several things online that say 48 hours is a good timeline to kind of gauge whether they're really bonded or not. Generally speaking, if your bunnies can go at least 48 hours in their neutral bonding space with no aggression, they're sleeping next to each other, they're sharing food, they're using the same litter box, they're playing together, this is a very good indication that your bunnies are fully bonded. However, it's important to note that the space has to be big enough. To graduate from bonding, I would say that the bonding space needs to at least be 4 by 4 feet. So totaling 16 square feet is the minimum amount of space that you want to make sure your bunnies can be together before saying that they're fully bonded. If they can peacefully coexist in that large of a space with no negative behaviors, they're probably good to go, but if not, they're gonna need to bond longer. Because Denzel and Sully had such a hard time bonding, I made sure to expand their area even bigger than 4 by 4 feet because I really wanted to make sure before leaving them unsupervised. It's just really important that you're comfortable leaving your bunnies alone together, that you're sure they're not going to hurt each other, and I think that's when they're really bonded.